So one of my earliest memories is wearing lace fold-down socks, voile dresses, and little patent leather shoes every Sunday best, to go to church. So I grew up in church, Baptist churches, Churches of Christ, and it was just something that our family did every single Sunday, but it became very much part of our identity. And so, I went to Sunday school, I became a Sunday school leader. I went to youth group, I became a youth group leader. I got to the point where I was considered a leader within the church, and I was even a preacher, and I would do sermons every now and then. And I did my PhD looking at the intersection of church and health, and how churches were there to serve their communities and bring health to their communities. And then I left.
Tell us more.
What?
Yeah,
I
cliffhanger.
left. And so I left when I was 30.
Okay.
And made that decision. And it was a really interesting and hard decision. And I just submitted my PhD because there was so much I loved about the church. There's so much I loved about Christianity. I loved the whole concept of social justice and that movement to care for the poor and for people to really look after those in their communities. And that when I read the Bible, there really was an equalizing. Everyone was equal, and I really loved that. However, the more I was part of church culture, the more I didn't feel like that reflected what I felt Christianity was about. And I felt like the church was more about, you need to do lots of things for the church. So you'd be there on Sundays all day, you'd be there on Wednesdays for like a Bible study, you'd be there on Fridays for youth group, and it was almost like, let's keep you separate from the rest of the world. And you are here, and your job is to bring people into this building. And also that a lot of the messaging then became about, hey, let's make everything that is uncertain and messy in your life certain and clean. And I think they were the things that I started to, as I got older, realize it's not that simple, and it's not that black and white. And there is so much color and beauty and amazingness in the messy that I don't actually know if I want to make that clean, actually. And what does that even mean? And so I left because I felt like so much of the messaging that was coming from the church was more about what we stand against as opposed to what we stand for. And I also didn't feel like the church was necessarily representing what I felt Jesus was about, or what I felt heaven was about, which I very much understand as bringing heaven to earth as opposed to a place you go when you die. So that whole emphasis on being pure and being saved and going to heaven was just not something I resonated with. And so I left. But it's been a massive deal, I think, for a lot of our friends and family, because it was, for the first 30 years of my life, that's where we were. And so we have a lot of friends and family who are still in church and probably are praying for our souls. And I appreciate that. I do also want to make another point, that when you do not follow normal norms in church, it can be really hard. So the decision for us to not have children, the fact that we grapple with health problems, and, being told, oh, we're praying for you, and then if you're not healed, that's on you, not on God. And being told that if I do yoga, that's Satan worship. Yoga, things that are good for my body. I just kind of thought I can't do that anymore. So curious about what your experiences have been around church. Is that something you've also experienced, or are you churchgoers, or has that not been something that's part of your upbringing and family discourse?
Can I ask a question first of all? Because I feel like 30 is quite not an old age, but it's quite a seasoned age to leave the church. Like I feel, for example, myself, I was part of a youth group quite I get what you say about it really consuming your life. Like that was my social life in year 11, year 12. And then once I got to university, I sort of stepped away. Like my family is from a country town. So the church, the community really revolves around that. And so I've been to church a lot growing up, and I was baptized as Anglican. Like it's just the done thing in the local town. But how do you feel like do you feel like your 20s would have been different if you had left sort of at the start of adulthood earlier? Do you think
Yes.
it would have pretty radically altered the way that you brought yourself to the world?
And there's things that I have to grapple with, right? So I have a lot of regret for sometimes the way I treated other people because I thought I was being a good Christian and I felt like I was very judgy. Now, in retrospect, I was judgy. I have a lot of regret for life things that I said I couldn't do because it wouldn't have been accepted in the church.
Like yoga.
Like yoga, but like also just relationship stuff, sex stuff.
Yep.
You know, just all of those types of things, which I felt very much constrained my experience of life. And so I have sometimes regret of experiences I never even let myself go there to. But then at the same token, I have to also hold all of the things that the church did give me that have been very beneficial for my life. And so I think there was an element of, I learnt how to public speak. This is probably one of the big things. I learnt how to do a sermon, like give a sermon and speak for 40 minutes with no notes. And that has put me in very good stead for my career. I can give lectures without notes, without much preparation, very confident doing that, speaking to hundreds of people.
A bit like you're doing this podcast.
A bit like
Darsh.
doing this podcast. I liked some of the people I met through church were amazing. I met my husband through church. I would never go back and change that. Like, that is just one of the most amazing parts of being in the church community is sometimes those things. But there was a lot I said no to, which I said I wish I hadn't.
Do you think, like, I grew up I went to an all-girls school, Catholic all-girls school, taught by nuns. And we would go to church every Sunday, and I really did not enjoy it at all. And when I got older, and I gave up religion pretty early on, my mother said, "You're too educated. That's the problem. When you get too much education, you often lose your religion." Do you think, because it's just interesting that it's when you're finishing your PhD that's when you lost your religion? I find that really fascinating.
I think so, because I feel like when you do your PhD or when you do any type of university education, you know, one of the biggest things that they teach you is to think critically. And so you are not meant to just accept things as fact just because someone has told you that. And particularly if an institution is telling you that, right? And so you start to question, or I started to question, but is that true? And then if you go back to the source, does it match? Where in the Bible does it say this? And all of the things that you're upholding. And so there is a lot that I feel like the church says, the Bible says, which isn't, I don't think, the correct interpretation. And, you know, I'm not going to go into a theological conversation about that, but I feel like the more educated you are, or the more that you're taught the skill of critical thinking, wherever that might be, the more that I think there is the risk, that's what probably churchgoers might say, of turning away from that because you start to question it.
So my question to you is, you're saying we. Obviously your husband left with you. That's what I'm assuming here now. How was that? Like, who started that conversation?
So I probably came to the decision faster, and probably from doing my PhD and reading a lot and just being like, wow, this doesn't resonate with what I believe needs to be happening. And I can't find a church here that reflects the values that I think I would like to go to or be part of. But because, back to Amelia's point, we had grown up, like 30 is a long time to be in that community. Our friends are there, our families are there, we got married there. And there is a very high level of obligation. And there is a very high level of, you know what, no one is perfect. No institution is going to be perfect. How much of this is just about us versus the broader practice of church? And so it did take quite a bit of conversation. And then even now, sometimes we would check in and go, do you think it was the right decision? But we've been out of it now for 8 years. And I just feel so much better and so much freer in my faith and spirituality than I ever did within the four walls of a church building.
Can I ask, do you think he would have left if you hadn't wanted to leave first? If you had never said anything that day when you first came home and said, this is what I'm thinking, would he still be in there?
I don't think so. And I can't speak for him, but there were also individual kind of decisions, and I think he was doing a lot of reading and thinking for himself as well. And, you know, there's just things that you kind of reflect on in terms of the authenticity of community within those organisations, and church is only an example of that. But are people really your friends? Are they your friends for conversion? Are they your friends because they need something from you? And I think as you start to unpack all of that, it becomes, why am I here? And so I do think that would have been the same thing for him. He would have come to potentially the same decision, but it's very hard to untangle because so much of our decision making at the time and sense making of such a huge life decision happened in conversation with each other. And we didn't tell people officially for a very long time. And, you know, one of the biggest things that struck us is when we left, not many people from the church chased us down to say, where did you go? Why are you not here? Can we have a conversation about that? And I just thought, if I was to leave work, a lot of people would be like, tell me about that. What happened? Whereas that has not been the case.
Do you think it's because it was too confronting for them, that it's just like maybe they were questioning it themselves so they don't want to chat to you about it as well? Or
I don't know. I think they probably prayed for us.
Okay.
But I think the authenticity piece of having those conversations again, very few people had that. Like I should say there were one or two people who did, but for the vast majority of the church leaders didn't ring us or talk to us and ask us about that. So I just think it shows that it's almost unexpected maybe that people are leaving.
It's really interesting, like, call me cynical, I don't know what, but it's fascinating because I feel it's this element of control almost as well when you have a community in a bubble. Like, I find it fascinating, for example, one of my friends I was catching up with last week, she was in the youth group with me, and she was very she had big boobs basically, and they would ask her to when we went on summer camps for youth group to cover up in certain ways. She wasn't allowed to wear a swimsuit like everybody else, like the other girls, because that was seen as being temptress. And a lot of my guy friends were the idea of masturbation was really disgusting, and they were really told not to. And so they would try and have these no fat months, and it was just almost very warping in that period of life when you're sort of coming of age as well. It was very controlling in so many elements. And I feel sometimes, when you're cut loose and when you run for it, not that you're running away, but it's one of those things where they know that they don't have that structure of belief that they can use to have you adhere to certain ways.
How do you feel all that's coming up for me at the moment is about religion used in society? I always think if I had to go to court, I probably would say to them, I can't swear in a Bible, because that wouldn't be true for me. I can't swear on the Bible, or if we see our politicians bringing politics and religion together, how do you feel about that sort of thing?
I really struggle with some of that kind of thing, and it goes back to, again, also what Amelia was saying, and we, I don't know if we want to go there, but everything that's happening in the US around abortion, right, is very much an example of religion influencing politics.
Yeah.
And the religious interpretation around abortion influencing then law and what is legal. And I just find that really uncomfortable. And so I do think we live, particularly in the Western world, in a culture where I feel like religion has enabled white men to control the narrative of what is good and normal and what we need to stand for. and it drowns out the voices of so many other experiences and expressions of life that is not healthy and is not a reflection of the broader community. And also back to one of Amelia's points, and also, you know, what you guys are talking about, that control. Like, I left the church when I was 30. I am still grappling with seeing my body as something that is good and not something that is evil. And I just think my formative years saw the fact that I developed young and have curves as something that was bad, as opposed to something that was beautiful. And I just hate that messaging that is put out to women.
Question for you guys. Some wise person, not sure who, once said that religion is the opium for the masses. If religion is dropping down within a population, do you think that there's something that's coming in to replace that for people?
Technology, as in Facebook, TikTok. That's what we're all worshipping nowadays.
Well, can I ask you, Darsh, did something else come in and fill that place for you that the church held in your life?
It actually freed me to hang out with people outside of church. Like, I have time and space to hang out with people that I wouldn't have had before. I think the church has stolen the narrative that they're the only way to create community. To have community, to belong, is through the church, whereas in TikTok, social media, are ways of connection. There's ways of connecting through work, there's ways of connecting through where you live, which doesn't require religion or institutions. And in terms of that census statistic and what is coming next, it's so interesting because I'm still friends with people who are very much part of the church leadership. They're freaking out. They're really freaking out about what that means and what that illustrates, and what's their response to this, and worrying about what does this mean for the souls of Australians. But I actually think this is a good thing. Some of the arguments that are coming out that we've become too individualistic and we only care about ourselves and we don't care about each other. But I don't see that. I see people fighting for climate change. I see people standing for refugees. I see our community saying, you know, all of these injustices are not okay. We didn't need the church to be able to do that. And I see us doing it. And I see the generations coming up really advocating for the betterment of our planet, for the betterment of our people, without the structure and the control and the organisation of religion.